Today, our guest on Personally Speaking is Joe Concha. You've seen him often enough in many, many media outlets, including Fox News. He's written a great new book called Progressively Worse. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante, and Joe Concha joins me now. Joe Concha is a Fox News contributor who joined the network in 2020. He appears on programs across Fox News Channel and Fox Business Network to provide commentary and insight on current events. Joe Concha has written the best-selling book, Progressively Worse. The subtitle is Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys, where he discusses how the Democratic Party has moved away from moderate politics in favor of leftist policies and what this means for today's politics. Joe is married to Jean, and together they're the parents of Cameron and Liam. He's here with us today to talk about his life, his career, his family, the faith and values that sustain him. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome back to Personally Speaking, the author and commentator, Joe Concha. We're talking to Joe Concha once again. He has a new book out called Progressively Worse, and I love the subtitle, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys. Joe, before we talk about the new book, let's go back to the last book. Everything you wrote, and come on, man, the story of Joe Biden was prophetic and has come to pass. I want to know, how did you know this thing was all going to implode the way it did?
Oh, because when you study Joe Biden's life, Father, obviously from going all the way back to law school, where he finished 76th out of 85th in his class, you're like, okay, this isn't a very smart person, right? And then all the lies that he has told throughout his political career that dates back pretty much to when I was born, right? In the early 70s. He's just failed upwards his entire life. And you just knew that once he got into a position of power, and I don't mean senator, because senator, you're one of 100, and vice president, you're probably one of the least powerful people in the country, despite the title, right? Once he got into power, then we're like, uh-oh, this guy's actually in charge. And then we saw everything that happened as far as the way he ran the economy, a guy who's never run a business in his life, or the way that he led the Afghanistan withdrawal. Remember, his defense secretary, Robert Gates, said about him that he's been wrong about every foreign policy decision that he's ever made. And I could go down the line, but it was pretty prophetic because, well, if you study Joe Biden's career and his life, he really hasn't been much of a success outside of the fact that he just seems to be chosen for things like vice president by Barack Obama because he did foreign policy experience that puts him ahead. And eventually he got to the presidency, all thanks to a once in a lifetime pandemic that if otherwise did not happen, Donald Trump would have been reelected quite easily, in my opinion.
Yeah. Joe, in your book, Progressively Worse, you talk about the fact that the media is so deeply into the pocket of the Democratic Party that no matter what really happens, we're going to get their version. And I'm mentioning that in the context of you and I speaking literally the day before the debate between President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. And yet, no matter what happens tomorrow at the debate, we can be pretty sure that the spin of the popular media will be that she did a good job. What are we supposed to do when we're being fed regularly something that is what we know, if we watched it, to be fundamentally untrue?
I think it's baked into the cake already, Monsignor. I think that the media is so distrusted now that when they tell us something, a lot of us just say, yeah, whatever, right? I don't buy what you're selling here. And I know this because I remember 2016 when I was writing for The Hill, that's a newspaper down in Washington, pretty centrist publication. And we did an analysis of 59 major endorsements by newspapers across the country. And we found that 57 endorsements went to Hillary Clinton and 2 went to Donald Trump. And what did that get Hillary Clinton? It got her a set of steak knives and a concession speech. In other words, all these endorsements, all these different cities, different states, swing states, didn't matter. And people just said, fine, you're telling me how to vote and think, I'm going to go my other way. Fortunately, the media isn't what it was when we were growing up, right? I grew up in New York. I had channels 2, 4, and 7. That was basically CBS, NBC, and ABC, and channels 5 and 11. But you got your national news from like those 3 evening newscasts or on shows like Meet the Press. Now, there are so many different outlets, particularly online, especially with social media, with Twitter being what it is under Elon Musk, which isn't like a leftist haven for censorship. So I think with all those other options, they serve as a great equalizer to mainstream traditional media that, yes, we'll say that Kamala Harris, she did what she had to do to win, or Donald Trump didn't look presidential. We already know what they're going to say, so it's not going to be much of a surprise, but there will be other options out there where we can see other points of view and perhaps even, God forbid, the truth about what's going to happen that night. But I think it's going to be a very long night for Kamala Harris, quite frankly, because she did a CNN interview. She only can go 16 minutes. She needed her emotional support animal, Tim Walz, sitting next to her for whatever reason. It looked like a parent-teacher conference. And we saw that she couldn't even answer the most basic of questions, which is, what will you do on day one? She wasn't even ready for an answer, or she didn't have the ability to pivot extemporaneously. And she's going to have to go 90 minutes now with Donald Trump on that debate stage. I just see her running into a lot of chopped word salads where we're going to be reminded of the candidate Kamala Harris was in 2019 when she had to drop out even before she got to Iowa.
Okay. Joe Concha is our guest. Progressively Worse is the book that he just wrote and is out now for our listeners and viewers to pick up. Joe, let me ask you, though, I was with people last night who are people who like President Trump very much, but they kind of cringed at one point in the conversation. Their fear about the debate, for instance, is that time and time again, in their estimate, Donald Trump has a wonderful opportunity to have victory and snatches it away by shooting himself in the foot. As somebody who has an admiration for him, as you do you have any idea why this man, who likes to win, seems to time and time again allow his mouth to get him into trouble?
Oh, I think because he feels that he always has to be the story, that he has to be the center of attention, that he and only he can make the best argument. I think we saw, however, during the June 27 debate with Joe Biden, a disciplined Donald Trump where he knew that Biden was gone mentally and he wasn't having a good night, and he let him sink himself and didn't for once make himself the focus. So I think he's being advised by a very good team this time around. And if they say, look, let her sink herself, or put the onus back on her, or ask like some just basic questions, like, for instance, why haven't you done one interview on your own since Joe Biden dropped out? Do you commit to holding a press conference before the end of the week? Because I'm going to hold one tomorrow. Why are you and your running mate so afraid of a press that adores you? Who is the incumbent right now, you or me? Because the answer is you. You own inflation, Kamala Harris. You own reckless spending. You own 12 million people crossing this border illegally. You own hundreds of terrorists crossing into this border illegally. You own people moving out of cities like New York and San Francisco because of out of control crime and thefts. You keep saying Joe Biden is healthy, Kamala, and you say he's totally engaged. You told that to CNN last week. Why are you lying about that? And if you're telling the truth about his mental health, why are you the nominee and not Biden? What are you doing on this stage? Shouldn't he be here instead? Why are you using my border wall in your ads? Did you not call the border wall medieval and ineffective? You never ran a lemonade stand, yet you want to preside over the U.S. economy? Do you believe that men can get pregnant? I could go down the line, but if he simply answers questions by asking questions back, even if it's asking them to the camera, to the American people, and then let her explain all those things I just outlined, I don't think it goes well for her. But to your point, the question is, can he do that? We saw in Atlanta that he could. Can he repeat it again? If he does, he is your 47th president, because this debate is everything.
Joe Concha is our guest. Progressively Worse is the book we're talking about. Now, Joe, anyone listening to you as you just went through that list of things that Donald should say in the debate would have to say, well, we'll listen to Joe Concha. He's a true conservative and has an intelligent point of view that is conservative. Was Joe Concha always a person of the right?
Oh, well, I don't know if I don't know what the right is anymore, right?
Okay.
In other words, I'm a common sense person.
Yes.
I have a family, right? My wife is an ER doctor. I have two kids, very active in sports, do excellent in school. So all I try to do is just go from a common sense perspective. And if common sense makes me a person of the right, then all right, I guess so. I guess that's maybe a good thing. But to answer your question, the first time I could vote in a presidential election, as I share in the book, I voted for a Democratic presidential candidate. Right. And that was Bill Clinton in 1996. And people always think of Clinton and they think of Monica Lewinsky, as they should. Worst unforced error of all time. It's disgusting to think that he was about my age and he was doing what he was doing with an intern in the Oval Office while he was president. It's kind of disgusting. But if you look at the record of Bill Clinton in 1996, pre-Monica, and it was between him and Bob Dole. And I saw a guy who was working with Newt Gingrich as far as passing welfare reform, passing balanced budgets amendment. Don't spend what you don't have, right? Pretty simple. We weren't in any wars. Our economy was humming along, and the guy seemed very competent. So I voted for him. If a Bill Clinton ran again today and he had a D next to his name, I'd vote for him. I would. without the Monica stuff. Again, I want to make that very clear. But if I could find somebody like a Reagan who worked with Tip O'Neill, which I also talk about in the book, they had their differences, but after work, they'd grab a bourbon and hammer out their differences, compromise in the name of advancing the country forward. Give me any candidates like that, and I'm happy to vote for them. I don't care what letter's next to their name. Now, all that said, in 2024, these ain't your daddy's donkeys anymore. There are no more centrists like Bill Clinton. There are no more Tip O'Neills as far as House speakers. You look at the Democratic Party, I look for common sense people, and I cannot find them anywhere in any way, shape, or form. Josh Shapiro is somebody who I can understand why he's at 65% approval as the governor of Pennsylvania. And Kamala Harris, she had this 1-inch putt. All she had to do was choose him as her vice president, and she probably would win Pennsylvania and then probably would win the election. Instead, she picks this Tim Walz, who I have 2 children in elementary schools. I don't want tampon machines in the boys' room. Sorry, I'm just kind of against that. So again, if that makes me a person of the right, being on the side of common sense, I'll take the title.
You'd rather say a common sense person, which I think is true. One of the things that strikes me about what you had to say in the book is that you stick to facts a lot, Joe, and that's an interesting thing. I don't think anybody's going to fact check your book and find anything wrong, but where did that appreciation for the truth come from in Joe Concha?
Oh, when I started going on Fox News and when I signed with the network several years ago, you learn quickly that there are people out there who solely exist to watch the network all day. And then if you get anything wrong, write a big story about it and then try to make it go viral on social media. So those folks, I'm thankful for. I mean, I find it quite pathetic that is their actual career, but fine. But that keeps me in check. So whenever I go on the air, I make sure that if I'm going to share a stat or a quote, it's like when I work with my brother-in-law when he laid down tiles in bathrooms like that. That was basically his job, and it was quite lucrative, I might add. But we always had this saying, measure twice and cut once. So whenever I go on the air, I make sure whenever I have my notes, measure twice, cut once, because there are people out there who are going to try to take you down. And thankfully, I don't get written up about almost ever. And people are like, oh, that's bad. Don't you want the publicity? I'm like, no, if you work for Fox and people are writing about it, 99% of them are going to write about it in a negative way. So it's those so-called fact checkers, media reporters that are out there that keep me in line and therefore make sure that I got my facts straight.
Joe Concha is our guest. His book is Progressively Worse. Joe, one of the people that you go after in your book, rightly, and she deserves it, is the current White House press secretary. Now, when I was reading your chapter and then having seen you in action on Fox News, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if President Trump gets elected and he picks Joe Concha to be his press secretary? If you were White House press secretary, what would you do differently from the current administration?
Let me put it out there and be very clear, because I'm sure President Trump listens to this podcast. Yeah, I don't want the job, Mr. President. I know if the president calls on you, you're supposed to, call a duty. Sure, I'll do it for the good of the country. I want no part of that job. And believe me, because you have to lie. Unfortunately, I'm talking about not just Democratic press secretaries, but Republican as well. You have to spin for your boss and put him or her in the best possible light. And I'm just not comfortable with that based on the conversation we just had previously to this. So even my dad's like, you should run for senator in New Jersey. Like, you could beat Cory Booker. I'm like, no. It's a jungle out there. They're going to dig through like my college, talk to my roommates, and did I put the toilet seat down and all this stuff? Like, I don't want to hear it. I'm sorry. I don't want any part of it. Press secretary, no way. And you see with Karine Jean-Pierre, I have some sympathy for her in the sense that, boy, you have to defend the indefensible. But at the same time, she is so profoundly horrible at her job. I mean, talk about somebody who can't speak extemporaneously. She's just not very good at it. And we know why she was chosen over somebody capable like a John Kirby, for example, is because she checks off certain boxes. And that's what this administration is all about, saying, see, now we have the first woman of color who was also a lesbian as a press secretary. Yay, we've made history. It's like, well, shouldn't you just choose the best person for the job? I mean, if the best person for the job is somebody who is homosexual and is a person of color, great, I'm all for them. But she clearly is not. Kirby would be a much better person in that situation. But here we are. So KJP, yeah, again, another human Chernobyl, just like Kamala Harris.
And on our program, I'm happy to say Joe Concha announced he will not accept the job of press secretary in the White House.
Breaking news.
Breaking news here. Joe, I was surprised, disappointed, I guess I'd say, to see two very notable Republicans come out and say, first, Liz Cheney, that she's endorsing Kamala Harris, which I cannot understand because of Liz's, among other things, pro-life record, that she could go for a woman who wants a 9-month right to abortion, among many, many liberal positions that Liz doesn't stand for. But Also, to see President George W. Bush say he won't endorse anyone. What do you make of this, that Republicans are unwilling to embrace their own candidate?
Well, I'm a fantasy football guy, and I just pulled off a trade after week one, which is really hard to do, but recently, and I think I got the better end of it. I think if we're looking at trades in terms of politics,
Right.
I will gladly take in a trade Elon Musk, who never voted Republican. I
Mm-hmm.
would gladly take Tulsi Gabbard, a war veteran who ran for president in 2020, and then, just like I talk about in the book, doesn't recognize her own party anymore. These ain't your daddy's donkeys. And then would I also take RFK Jr. in terms of an endorsement and the 5% of the vote that he brings, which could make all the difference in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan? Yeah, I'll trade that, and I'll give you gladly Dick Cheney, who literally shot a guy in the face and brought us into war under George W. Bush under false pretenses. All right. So you can have him. That's fine. I'll gladly give you Liz Cheney, who lost by something like what, 35 points in Wyoming to another Republican. So is she a Republican? Because a lot of Republicans don't believe that. So yeah, I'll give you those two. I'll throw in a Mitt Romney, or I'll throw in a George W. Bush, who, when he left office, was at something like 33% approval. And I'll gladly take some of these Democrats that are coming across the aisle that are supporting Trump.
Okay, you just mentioned Elon Musk. I want to stop there for a second. Again, reading all the newspapers every day, because I'm a newspaper guy. So I see, when I read the New York Times, it's a terrible idea, they tell us, that Elon Musk might be advising the Trump administration. And then I go to the Wall Street Journal and they say in their editorial, it's a great thing that he's turning to Elon Musk. So again, we go back to the issue of what's the truth, what's the best thing for our country. Your view of Elon Musk as person, as resource for a future administration.
Well, I love the fact that Trump announced at the New York Economic Club last week that Elon Musk will be running a government efficiency panel, or whatever you want to call it, program. And he would gladly take that position, because what people don't like most, I think, outside of inflation and the economy in general and immigration, and particularly illegal immigration in the border, is the fact that government simply is not efficient, and we don't trust our leaders when it comes to spending. And if you could have somebody who's run successful businesses like SpaceX, like Tesla, and he's going to come in there and clean up the waste, I'm all for that. Because again, I voted for Bill Clinton because I love balanced budget amendments. I think that makes sense. Don't spend what you don't have. Run your country like you would run your household. Pretty simple stuff. So yeah, Musk, I think would be a great addition. I think anybody who hasn't worked as a politician for 30, 40, 50 years, like a Joe Biden, less of them in government, more people who ran businesses in government successfully. Yeah, I like it.
Joe Concha, aside from being a contributor at Fox News, and but before that, he had done other media work as well, but he's written this great book, Progressively Worse. Happens to also be a married man who has two kids, Liam and Cameron. Now, I got to tell you, one of the things I hear a lot from couples, because I do weddings all the time, is, what we think we're going to have children, but, bring children into this horrible world. The country's in such a terrible state. So Joe Concha is a dad who decided with his wife to bring forth human life. When you look at the hopelessness out there, sometimes that couples talk about, are you still confident that your children are growing up in an America that can be a great promised land for them?
I hope so. I don't say that with a lot of conviction, though. I mean, I love my town. I'm in Wyckoff, New Jersey, and the public school system is run so great. The teachers are awesome. All that woke stuff that we hear about going on in other places like Virginia or Chicago, and in a lot of other places, then I'd be worried. But I know here, at least in this nice little ecosystem that we have, that they're going to get a good education. When they go to college, I think I've eliminated like 90% of colleges that they're allowed to go to, because it's become so woke, and the indoctrination is just insane. So they're going south. I think south we're safe. All I see in my neighborhood are Clemson flags, Alabama, South Carolina, in Tennessee, and I'm like, wait, I'm in New Jersey. Why am I in the SEC all of a sudden, right? The Southeast Conference. So yeah, they'll go down school down south, and I hope there at least there's some more common sense values that when they go into the real world, A, they'll be ready for it, and B, they'll have a view of the world where it isn't what some of these kids are being taught. Again, tampons in schools, boys can get pregnant. Kamala Harris supporting government paying for sex changes. Sorry, I don't want any part of that. So I'll be a lot more optimistic if Trump wins here. And then in 2028, like a Glenn Youngkin comes along, who I think is a great Republican and really could be a great president. Glenn Youngkin, Marco Rubio, Ron DeSantis, that sort of person. Then if that continues them for another 8 years, well, all right, that covers their childhood and they're out and they lived in a world where at least the government is doing things that they should be doing. So yeah, that's my optimism right now. If you talk to me on November 6th and Kamala Harris wins, then I'll have zero optimism that this country can be the great country that I grew up in and my parents before
Joe
me.
Concha is our guest. We're talking about many things, including Progressively Worse's book. Joe, I'm old enough that I remember very clearly, because I voted in that election, when George McGovern imploded and Richard Nixon won in a landslide. I mention that because the Democrats, it took them a while, but they learned a lesson that going off the leftist bridge is a bad idea. You would think now, compared to what George McGovern was saying back then, that the party is going to see once again that they are heading way, 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 way too far left. And yet you don't see any movement to change it back toward the middle. Do you think a loss for Kamala Harris would finally make the party say, maybe the middle is really where we want to be?
Well, Monsignor, I think it'll be the opposite effect. If she loses, then you're going to hear from the loudest voices on that side, like the AOCs of the world, that they didn't go far enough to the left enough, right? Maybe we should have said we did want to ban fracking after all, that we did want to end all fossil fuels, that we should have an electric vehicle mandate. I think the opposite will happen. I think the crazies will take over the party saying that, see, you tried to run as a centrist. You started saying that you supported border wall construction, Kamala. That's not going to fly. I would think they would learn from it, yeah. But in the end, I think they're going to be in serious trouble because if Kamala Harris loses, then I guess their bench is Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. But as we saw, there's an anti-Semitic pro-Hamas wing of this party, call it like 15, 20% of their voters who simply will not accept a Jewish president. So even though he may be the best option, he may not get the nomination just because of his religion, which is utterly ridiculous. But that's where that party is. So yeah, I think they'll probably maybe go to the left initially in opposing everything Trump tries to do and then realize, oh, this is a big mistake like they did with defund the police. But by the time they recover from that, I think the Republicans have such a deep bench like I described before. And I don't think Democrats have it. And the one candidate they do have that could possibly win, they're not going to accept because, well, he's Jewish.
Yeah. And you go into each of these characters, these personalities in the book, which is wonderful. Certainly for me, an important issue is the whole right to life. And I'm just wondering, do you think that there's any way in the world that Republicans can stand as a pro-life party and still win elections?
I think they're going to have to kind of do what Trump's doing, to be quite honest with you. And that's not because I support it or anything. I don't think we have nearly enough. I have several friends. My wife's in her mid 40s, and some of her friends just simply could not have children. They try and they can't. And then to try to adopt is like impossible. Like it's insanely expensive. There just aren't enough babies up for adoption. And I think if we encourage that more instead of just going right to abortion, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
But in the end, like staunchly pro-life. I mean, let's put it this way. They're extinct in the Democratic Party. I think there's one lawmaker left that's pro-life and the rest of them are pro-abortion. And in the book, I talked about Jimmy Carter, who was actually a pro-life Democratic president. I'm certain we're never going to see that again. But can a Republican run on something where you have like a federal ban on abortion? No, I don't think so. I think you make it a states' rights issue and then let the people decide in those states whether they want to outlaw the practice or not. And again, there are far too many abortions in this country done for all the wrong reasons, right? Basically as a form of birth control, which is utterly ridiculous. But in the end, I think Trump's position where he says, okay, basically first trimester, I wouldn't ban it. But then if you go to the second or third trimester and you want to have an abortion, like Kamala Harris supports, like up until the moment of birth, that's something that most people, even Democrats, can't stomach.
And your candidate in 1996, Bill Clinton, who was promoting the idea of abortion is safe, legal, and rare, could he be nominated today?
No. No way. That would just not happen. They are a radical party now that believes that you should have an abortion anytime, anywhere, any point of first, second, or third trimester. And again, it's just a whole bowl of wrong. But yeah, Bill Clinton and his pragmatic stance, nope, would not exist or not survive today.
And they also want, of course, the government to pay for all those abortions. Last question, because I know you're going to another program. Joe Concha is our guest. Progressively Worse is his book. And I hope people will get not only Progressively Worse, but you got to get hold of his first book on Joe Biden because it's so good and so accurate and so prophetic. But last question, I promise. In light of the state of the country and the world, and I wonder, because I hear from most guests, to be honest with you, that I'm not real hopeful for the future. Does Joe Concha find someplace in his heart and soul the ability to say, we're going to get through this, we've done it before, we'll rise up again as a country and as a world, we'll fix this mess that we're in? Where is Joe Concha on hope?
On hope, I guess I'm in the category of, okay, well, if we're going to elect inept leaders on the national level, or here in New Jersey, as far as our governors always being Democrat, it seems, or our senators are Democrat, and they're not your daddy's donkey's Democrat. They're not the pragmatic ones that I mentioned earlier in this interview. I then come down to, okay, well, I'm just going to have to do this myself. I'm just going to have to work harder, overcome all these taxes that I'm going to have to pay in addition. And I guess I'm going to have to find ways to make sure that my family always feels safe and protected if crime starts to spiral out of control out of cities like Newark and then into my neighborhood, for example. So in the end, I just say, all right, well, I guess I'm on my own. And my wife and I will just have to do this and do the best we can with the cards that were dealt. But I'm optimistic that in this presidential election anyway, that Trump will win, and he'll win quite comfortably in the Electoral College. And then from there, I think we get back to making this country, for lack of a better term, great again.
Okay. Joe Concha has been our guest. For our listeners and viewers, please get hold of Progressively Worse. I'm a slow reader, but I whipped through this book because Joe has a wonderful way of speaking clearly, always speaking with truth. You can fact check if you want, and you will not find anything here that you have to fact check, because Joe, as he said earlier in today's program, has stuck to the facts because he knows there are people out there who would love for him to trip, stumble, and fall. And so he purposely does not. And that's a rare thing for people in media, to get a fair and, pardon the expression, balanced view that's based in the truth. Joe, you're a voice that we need to hear. I hope you're right about a lot of things you said today. And thank you again for being with us on Personally Speaking.
Msgr, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for being with us on Personally Speaking. If you need to reach me for any reason, you can do that at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. You probably listened to this program on the Catholic channel, 129. And you can do more than that. You can watch it as well on YouTube if you like, by searching under Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante. We're also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Msgr Jim Lisante. We're on Instagram at Personally Speaking Podcast. Please share and let others know about Personally Speaking. I'm delighted to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.